We'll review the deep south snowstorm, take a look at some milder air, I think, over the next 7 days. Welcome to this edition of Weather to Watch. We'll take a look at some pictures from New Orleans here and also areas of the Florida Panhandle. Pat O'Brien's on the left. We've got some very dedicated musicians walking through the French Quarter. I'm an aspiring jazz piano player. I'm not sure I would carry my piano through that, but that made they seem a little bit more portable. Anyway, the show goes on, and then always surreal to see palm trees and snow in the same picture. Pretty weird down there. So you can always tell snow on the visible satellite image by looking at where it doesn't move. And also you can see river features, reservoir features. So it's very clear just by looking from space where the snow band was laid down on this latest storm. But we can take a look at some of the measurements now. The scale we're looking at here is down on the bottom here. So the purple right here is the half foot, and then this darker purple is the 1 foot. So you can kind of see that the maximum snow totals, we'll change my pen to, let's say, yellow, are right around Lake Pontchartrain and the New Orleans area, and also in extreme western and sort of northern panhandle areas of Florida. So the half foot area all throughout here. Parts of Louisiana were under a blizzard warning yesterday. Very common 6 to 10 inch totals through that part of the world, and continuing on into the Florida panhandle, and a nice swath through not central, but southern Georgia, with at least a half foot of snow that got all the way to coastal areas of South Carolina as well. New Orleans, by the way, picked up about 10 inches officially at the airport. That particular station goes back to 1948. It broke their old record of 2.7 inches. And in fact, the last time it snowed in New Orleans was back in 2004, and that was only a half inch. So these guys, especially the kids down there, this is a storm they will never, ever, ever forget. So obviously you can see where the last storm laid down its snow. This is just snow, no snow, not depth. The storm that moved up the eastern seaboard into New England over the weekend is visible, and you can still see the storm from 2 weeks ago where a foot and a half of snow was laid down through parts of Kansas that's eroding away, but is still there after all this time. 48% of the lower 48, but I think that number is going to start dropping as the pattern changes. Take a look at the visible satellite loop, and you see a couple of things. This storm is departing, just some rain showers in South Florida, and then that's it. You can see a twirl of high clouds there through the northern plains. We'll investigate what that is. Much of the country is beginning to calm down, less stormy, and that's a good pattern. And this is what we need to get rid of to get the temperatures warmer. This jet stream flow, 500 millibars, a good estimate of jet stream flow. The winds are assumed to be following the red lines like that. You can see a trough of low pressure here, a reinforcing shot of cold air. But generally speaking, this has carved out the central and eastern U.S. for quite a time now. So the warm air is always on this side of the jet, and the cold air is always on this side. And that pattern has been very persistent. It's why we can't really warm up. We're going to take a look at a surface map review. So what is this exactly? So these are station model plots. I'm a meteorologist. That's what I grew up plotting and watching and went to school for. It's kind of shorthand. It's kind of interesting to look at, but if you want to know how to read it, here's a station model plot right here in Alabama. And this is color coded, so it makes it even easier. So the number to the upper left of the center, which is right there, that's going to be temperature, in that case 29 degrees, coded red. And then the dew point, which is a measure of moisture, is below that. So there's a 2 right there. If there were cloud cover there, this circle would be filled in like it is down here in Florida. But it isn't, so it means it's sunny there. And then the wind always follows these contours. It's better to look, let's say, here in Arkansas, where the winds are clearly out of the south. But this high extends all the way up to the eastern seaboard, all the way up to Maine. It's moving south, so it is warming itself, but snow cover is kind of laughing at that and making the high stick around maybe a little bit longer. A little clipper system with the low center over Lake Superior, and a little bit of warming going on here over the central plains, above freezing certainly. Temperatures getting into the 30s, even a couple of 40s here and there. That cool front will kind of one step forward, one step back on the warming trend that's trying to occur in the central plains, but eventually it will be warmer, and I'll show you why when we show you the jet stream forecast. And then the Intermountain West, no surprise if you live out there, it's calm and dry and quiet. Southern California, still fire weather risk with a red flag warning all the way down to the Mexico border, and high wind warning still in the mountains north of Los Angeles. So that still is a very potent situation with very low dew points in that part of the world. Let's go back to the Great Lakes. So we have winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories along the eastern shores of Lake Michigan up there in the UP. Usually we talk about, Buffalo, Cleveland, these areas here, but the winds are not supportive of that right now. But this is, so we still have, pretty good snows going on there. And while I have this particular geographic part of the world frozen, let's take a look at, Great Lakes temperatures and ice. And one of the questions I posed was, are the Great Lakes frozen over? Because much of this area here has been below zero for many, many, many days in a row. Well, the answer is kind of interesting to look at. So last Saturday, you do see, so how to read this is where you see gray, like here in western parts of Lake Erie, that is snow cover. And where you see color, that's temperature. So you see western Lake Erie, parts of Saginaw Bay, a pretty good chunk of Green Bay, areas just off to the east of Duluth there have ice extent as of Saturday. Now, if we go to yesterday, which is the last time this was measured, you see now all of Green Bay is frozen over. Off of Chicago is frozen. And then now the difference here in Lake Erie is the North Shore has some ice now. The South Shore has more ice. That western area grew a little bit. And most areas got, Saginaw Bay had a little bit more. So one question you might ask is, well, if it was colder up here, why are these lakes freezing over more? And the answer is all about lake depth. So these lakes are shallower, especially at their ends, and it's just easier for ice to form in those areas nearer to the shore where it's shallow, and again, the general lake structure. We're looking at ice cover at about 22%, and I expect that will start to decrease here over the next week or so. So what about the cooling? So high temperatures, National Weather Service blend shows for Thursday, still pretty cold in the northern plains, but of course by comparison, a heat wave, and it'll only be 10 in Minneapolis, but it was far below zero not that many days ago. So the freezing line is roughly where this blue starts here. So areas that made progress today with warming will take a step back tomorrow. But if you go to Saturday, recovery in Texas, recovery in Chicago, getting above freezing. Warm winds are blowing through this area here. Florida's trying to recap. You can still see the cooling effects of the snow cover there in the Florida area, though, and even in parts of Louisiana. See how it's not orange, it's more like a yellow? Yeah, snow will do that. So again, a warming trend, not necessarily for these areas of Montana and Wyoming, but for much of the U.S., a pattern shift that will bring milder air. So here's a series of surface maps on Saturday. Another, I wouldn't necessarily call this a big Arctic push. It is slightly colder, but it doesn't have its roots in the far north, so it's not as cold. Another approaching cool front on Saturday, and if we move ahead to Sunday, kind of a developing storm system here, but this high is Pacific in origin, so it's modified air off the North Pacific, so it is drier and generally pretty mild, so this isn't an Arctic push at all. But this system here is a rainmaker, and is there enough cool air on the northern end of this for snow or any kind of freezing precipitation? I tend to doubt it. I don't think there's enough of that, but it does kind of traverse slowly on Monday to the east, and while this high, again, of Pacific origin, pretty mild, continues to dominate the central plains. What about total precipitation with that developing system? This is Friday and Saturday, and this is just north of the snow area. But if you look at the scale here, 2 to 2.5 inches of rain over a 2-day period over these areas of East Texas, northern Louisiana, and parts of Mississippi. And finally, we'll look at the 500 millibar flow, again, a rough approximation of how the jet stream winds are flowing and blowing. This is the GFS model, reinforcing shot of cool air there. Generally, though, a ridging of high pressure for a change over the central plains instead of a trough, with a big old cutoff low forming in Southern California. Hopefully that'll bring some rain to part of that area. And then here's that ridge right there. Now, again, the cold air is always on this side, the warm air on this side, so the jet stream flow has been far diverted to the north. This is generally here a milder pattern of air for much of the central and eastern United States, with the exception maybe of New England and extreme northeastern parts of the lower 48. Well, thank you so much for watching this edition of Weather to Watch. It looks like the pattern might be easing up a little bit. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.